This is the subcommittee before you today. Councillor Adams, Councillor Hastings and myself. Housekeeping. Please could everyone ensure their mobile phones are turned off. The toilets for those that need them are out through the back doors to right. Gents is on the left, and then if you go a bit further down, the ladies is just round the corner on the left. We're not expecting any fire drills today, so if the fire alarm does go off, please evacuate the building. The closest exit is again through those doors, directly in front, the next set of doors, and then turn left, and there's a staircase that takes you straight down to the car park, and then we assemble on the other side of the road by the police station. So I will move on to the substantial part, the minutes of the last meeting. I take it we've all had a look at those. Do I have a proposer?
Chairman, you were there.
I was here. I'll propose them. Yeah. So just where it says the other page. There's that. Do I have any declarations of interest? Excellent. Is there any urgent business? No. In which case, we will move on to the matter at hand. Can I pass to the licensing officer to summarise the report, please?
There we go. So, Freeboard Group Limited has applied for a premises licence under the Licensing Act for a floating restaurant to be named The Boat. The applicant proposes to sell alcohol and provide live recorded music and late night refreshment until midnight, with extended hours for New Year's Eve. The full application can be found at Appendix 1 of the report, which is at page 19, with a summary of their application, including the additional measures that they've proposed, at page 35. The applicants provided an outline of the business and the nature of the activities in a document which can be found at Appendix 2 of the committee report on page 41. The intention is that primarily it would operate between May and September each year, with the majority of people attending the vessel via their own boat or Trinity Landing in Cowes. The applicant will have the opportunity to expand on their proposals today if the subcommittee wish to clarify anything further. It should be noted that with regard to Live Music Act 2012, it outlines various exemptions for providing entertainment, and therefore live recorded music could be provided at these premises between 8 and 11 without needing to be specified on the licence. If issues were to arise with such entertainment, then a review of the licence could be sought in order to regulate these activities once more. During this statutory 28-day consultation period, representations were received from local residents of East Cowes. One remains outstanding and for consideration by the subcommittee today to determine this licence application. The local resident is concerned that noise nuisance will be caused from the proposed live and recorded music due to their previous experience of music from Cowes Week, which travels across the water from Cowes. Their representation can be found at Appendix 3, which is on page 59 of the report. It should be noted that a number of the matters raised aren't actually relevant here today, and the only matter that the subcommittee are able to consider is the element relating to local residents being disturbed by music and the sale of alcohol. All other elements of that representation are not relevant to the licensing objectives. The applicant has put forward measures in their application that they will have in place to mitigate any impact on the licensing objectives. As I said, they're on page 35 of the report. The responsible authorities that were consulted on as part of this application process are all content with the proposed activities and the mitigations in place and have no outstanding representations. This includes environmental health with a lead authority in respect of noise. And one of the factors that addressed their concerns relating to prevention of public nuisance was the inclusion of a noise management plan, which the applicant has proposed will be a condition of the licence if it is granted. That condition is on page 37 of the report. Daniel Power from the Department of Environmental Health are here today, so if the subcommittee have any questions for him, they are able to ask him today. So the licensing subcommittee are required to consider the applicant's proposals and the concerns raised regarding potential for noise nuisance raised by the resident and determine this application for a premises licence. As stated in section 9.38 of the national guidance issued under section 182 of the Licensing Act 2003, you must have regard to all the evidence heard, the national guidance, as well as the council's own statement of licensing policy. So you must determine this application with a view to promoting the licensing objectives. The options you have available to you today are to grant the licence as per the application, including those measures proposed by the applicant in their application. The other option you have is to grant the licence as per the application with any modifications that you deem necessary, whether changing the hours or additional conditions that you deem proportionate and appropriate to ensure that the licensing objectives are promoted. And the alternative option you have is to reject the licence application completely.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for the licensing officer? No. In which case, we will move on to the applicant, please. If you could present your case.
Is the right button the right?
And welcome to our meeting.
Thank you very much. So my name's Matthew Phipps. I'm here to present the application on behalf of the proposed licence holder this morning. Well, let me start by getting my clients to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name's Matthew. I will be the general manager and in charge of operations of the boat.
And I'm Johnny. I'm one of the founders and the designer of the boat.
So the application that's in front of you and the detail, your licensing officer has kindly set out. The way that I propose, if it's appropriate to address you, is really just to take you through the agenda pack and just bring a few of the paragraphs within the agenda pack to your attention. There is also a couple of observations I'd like to make about your licensing policy as well. There is a note that has been circulated that I produced that I'm sorry that it was produced relatively late in the day, but that sought to attend to the representation that's live before us. And that representation is on page 59 of the agenda. To slightly take things back to front, I'm just going to address you on the issue of the representation right from the outset, because as you'll appreciate, but for the representation, this would have been granted under delegated authority. So it's the representation that's very much the rationale and reason for our attendance today. And you'll forgive me, I'm not going to hand it up, but the part to which your licensing officer referred that has relevance within the representation is the bit I've marked green. Not here to be rude at all about the representation, but the rest of it genuinely is irrelevant to today's proceedings. And that concerns itself with the following sentence. I'm sure that people there at a local residential complex would not want a nightclub blaring out music into the night and drinking alcohol there. Insofar as the nightclub and blaring out music is concerned, just so we're clear, nor would we. This is not an application that seeks to have a nightclub blaring out music until late hours. And I just thought that in the sense of context, it was important to flag that from the outset. So then just dealing with the application itself, before the submission of the application, we engaged through your lead licensing officer with the various responsible authorities who was sent a draft application, a draft operating schedule, an introductory brochure that you'll see within the pack that I'll come to in due course, and effectively an invitation to engage with us to see if there was anything we could do to improve or amend the application in line with the officer's concerns. And your environmental health officer engaged with us straight away. In fact, we've had engagement from two of your environmental health team, and they effectively asked us to beef up, for want of a better phrase, our application to include a noise management plan. At the time, and Daniel's here so you can correct me if I overstep, but at the time I think the predominant concern was that noise travels over water, and that therefore we needed to be on top of any music or noise that we were going to be having on the boat for fear that it would travel greater distances than might be usually expected. The concern now, as you'll have seen, is actually all about our being moored in Cowes. The concern now is not actually about us being on the water. But that's sort of by the by, if you will. So I do make the point about the pre-application consultation because, as you will see within the agenda pack, there are no representations from any of your responsible authorities, and that's set out on page 10 of your agenda. The national guidance would, I think, be fairly summarised as saying that generally the officers would be considered your experts, your first point of call, certainly in terms of the issues that they govern and control. And so I do say that there's significant import to be attached to the lack of a representation from them. So going then on through from page 10, paragraph 8 of the report, East Cowes Town Council provided a statement that they support the application. You will appreciate I'm bound to bring that to your attention because as a licensing solicitor, I don't get to say that very often. More often than not, the Town Council are in numbers on that side of the desk telling me why my application couldn't and shouldn't be approved or even considered. And so, although I accept that that may not be the most persuasive of points, it's a point in my favour that it would have been, I couldn't help myself, if you'll forgive me for saying so. So then the other representations, there were 3 representations received. 1 now remains live. Just to give you a little context on where the other 2 have found themselves. Through your lead licensing officer, very helpfully, we provided with their comments. We effectively then responded, and the officer engaged with them, explained the operating schedule, the conditions on the license and so forth, and they then deemed themselves as satisfied with the proposals. To be fair to them, when first the notice is displayed, when first the advertisement is positioned in the local press, you don't always have all the information to hand, and you might be concerned about something about it that later you discover actually it's not as concerning as you first thought, and that seems to have been the case with the other 2. There are reference there throughout to your national guidance, and then at page 15 of the agenda, there's reference to your licensing policy. The paragraph that I particularly want to bring to your attention, one I'm sure you'll be familiar with, but it's paragraph 2.1. And I'll just read it if I may. It's page 6 of 27 of the policy. And it says this: the Isle of Wight has many and varied licensed premises and events. The licensing authority recognises that these play a vital part in the cultural identity of the island and are main contributors to the local economy. They attract tourists and visitors and make for vibrant towns and communities, while at the same time providing employment. We'd like to add, develop and support that proposition. That fundamentally is what we are about. And I forget where, but I think there's reference to the diversity of premises later in the policy. This is an application for a boat. And in terms of a diverse, interesting, developed offer for the island, we say we fall squarely within that, and that will be an asset, not anything that could be fairly said to detract from what's available and on offer and open and trading on the island. So the evaluation of the report, page 16, 17 and 18, touches on detail and is effectively your officer's report to you, but it's fairly summarised at page 18 of the report in the recommendation. And in simple terms, well, you can read it for yourselves, you don't need me to read that for you. But with the inclusion of a noise management plan as a condition that would, of course, have criminal sanction effect, the recommendation is there's no reason this shouldn't be granted. So over then to page 35, the pages in between are just the application itself, which of course you're welcome to look through, but it's a pretty dry document. But at page 35 are the conditions that we propose. You'll have had the opportunity to look at those, but can I just highlight a couple of them? Page 35, 2/3 of the way down the page, food to be available throughout the trading day. Below that, comprehensive CCTV. Over the page at 36, staff training. zero tolerance policy in relation to drugs, liaison with the police, staff training on safety, evacuation and use of emergency equipment, again in public safety, compliance with MCA requirements for vessel construction, outfit, manning, safety management at all times. And then prevention of public nuisance, which is probably the primary point for today. Acoustic levels to be monitored by the DPS and event organisers to ensure they remain at acceptable levels. Notices to be displayed about arrival and departure. Over onto 37, a noise management plan, and then protection of children from harm, suitable conditions to safeguard against the sale of alcohol to those underage. Over the page, there is then a plan of the premises. And the point that I make about the plan in broad observation, there are some actually bigger plans when we come to the presenter in due course, is that predominantly the premises is laid out to tables and chairs. And so that's that sense of nightclub that the representative seems to have. Respectfully, we just don't accept that that's fair. And the point about nightclub I make in the covering note is that there aren't that many nightclubs I'm familiar with that cease trading at midnight. Those are restaurant hours predominantly. So there's some, and I accept it doesn't touch on licensing objectives throughout the document. There are some photographs. There's some introduction to the individuals. You'll see reference on, I think, page 44 of the report to Johnny and Matt, who are in front of you today. Reference then to the operations at page 7 of the presenter, page 45, so my eyesight really isn't, page 45 of your report. And I just would like to, if I may, address you on the point of weather. Weather isn't usually a matter that particularly concerns licensing applications, but actually I think weather ultimately is the primary point about today. First of all, the boat is intended to leave the mooring and go out to sea. It has been constructed with that in mind, and you will see from the presentation significant consideration has been given to its design, where it may position itself and so forth. Second point to make is that attendees will not be coming through the mooring or the quay. You have to come by boat or tender. So there isn't, to be fair to the representative, a concern about will people be wandering up through cows late at night. But if that were any concern of yours, that can't happen. We don't have permission to disembark people through the quay or the mooring at all. But our intention is not to be trading from the mooring. Our intention is to take advantage of, and there's a little map plan, other locations. And because we draw to 3.5 meters, we can get fairly close into land and protect ourselves against weather. And there's, analysis of weather and winds and so forth. But there are two circumstances where it is reasonable to presume we are likely to trade from the mooring. Bad weather is the summary answer, but one of those is rain. When it's properly raining, and having travelled down here yesterday, I understand you're familiar with proper rain, having seen a little bit of it last night. The point that I make to you, it's not a condition for the license, it's just if I may say, it's a little bit of common sense. We're not going to be trading on the upper deck on a day like yesterday evening. We will be trading, as you would anticipate, in the enclosed parts of the premises. And the enclosed parts of the premises, which are again set out, the lower decks effectively are set out on the plans, wouldn't, I would suggest, lend fairly to any conclusion that we're likely to be causing a noise nuisance to residents that are said to be 500 meters away. And then there's wind. In terms of wind, 2 points to make about wind. The first is that if it is really blowing, then it is probable that we will struggle to trade because people have to come to us by boat themselves. And whilst we might be secure on the mooring, in reality, people will struggle to get to us. But the second point to make is this. In a northerly, if we were faced with a northerly, of course, the wind would be pushing any noise that we might be creating away, not toward the point of concern. And if the wind were blowing in, as you'll have seen from the data in the assessment, we're much more likely to be able to get out, for want of a better phrase. Now, I grant you that those are our assessments, our considerations, but I don't think unreasonable. So the next page then, please, is page 49, which talks about operational risks. And that touches on some of the points in the weather part that I've touched on, but there is a secondary point. This is an application for midnight, and it's unashamedly an application for midnight because, as we touched on earlier, broadly those are restaurant hours. But the anticipated time of greatest attraction for the boat is sunset. That's when we anticipate being at peak trade. That's, if you imagine why you would go out to a boat for a meal, for an evening, and sunset and the attraction of being on the water and having the horizon in the far distance. That's the point. It's not really anticipated, although it is part of our application request, but it's not really anticipated that this is in and of itself a late night offer. So then, I mean, there's some other hopefully interesting but not necessarily material points about construction and the shipyard and so forth, which I'll leave you to look at. So there's then, I mentioned the little response that I pulled together to the representation. Can I just summarize that note, if I may? I've touched on the representation itself. The hours don't seem to allow for the conclusion that the objector makes about the nature of our operation. The layout doesn't support the conclusions that she makes. The conditions proposed in the application seem to mitigate against those concerns in any event. The weather point I've covered probably as much as needs to be covered. Obviously happy to answer any questions that you may have. Happy to take you through candidly any of the material that's in front of you, but in circumstances where there's seemingly no attendance by the objector, probably I'll stop there if I may.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for the applicant?
Probably just one.
Yes. Oh.
Just what's involved in the noise management plan.
So at the moment, the draft of the noise management plan has been circulated to environmental health, and there's some further work to do on that, to be fair, and we talked about that briefly outside. But essentially, it's to ensure that the system that is installed, the music system, is one that is suitable and compatible to the operation, so it doesn't extend beyond a suitable level. That's the primary one. The second one is about management control. In all reality, it's about making sure that the management understand that what they've got to do is do an analysis and an assessment and work out the levels at which music can fairly be played so that it doesn't cause a nuisance. We want to have the entertainment facility, but you will see from the layout of the premises that predominantly it's laid out to tables and chairs, and by the very nature of tables and chairs, particularly with, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but with what we would like to be a high-end, significant food offer, you're going to have to be able to speak when you're sitting next to one another. There's no interest, there's nothing in it for us commercially to have music blaring out that would prohibit that. But that still would allow for us to have live music, that might still allow for us to have recorded music. Common sense, I suppose, probably is, I appreciate it's a little more sophisticated than that, I don't want to be rude, and it runs to 12 pages or so, but yeah, that's probably a fair summary.
So, you jumped
Did everybody
ahead.
hear
You jumped ahead, Councillor Adams.
Sorry, did everybody hear that?
Yeah,
Sure.
we've jumped ahead slightly there. I'm going to move on, obviously, so we move on to the responsible authorities, which I guess is environmental health in this instance.
And thank you for having me, Chair, and morning committee members. So I'm Daniel Power. I'm a regulatory officer within the Environmental Health Department. So environmental health as a responsible authority are primarily concerned with several key licensing objectives, those being public safety and the prevention of public nuisance. Now, I've had the opportunity to discuss the application with the applicant during the pre-application stage and also the consultation period, and that's including myself and a colleague, Mr. Downham. Now, we've assessed the application and considered some additional safeguards were needed to ensure the promotion of those objectives. And they relate to the review of noise levels, especially at source, the onward journey of patrons, and also a degree of onshore noise monitoring. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the condition with regards to a noise management plan suitably addresses each of those areas and should have the effect of safeguarding the public nuisance objective. Now, I've had the opportunity to look through the noise management plan, and there is quite detailed, to be fair. There are discussion with regards to suggested levels. So this relates to part 2.3 of the noise management plan, which is on page 4, and it discusses a level of between 70 to 75 dB, so decibels, and that's at source on the boat. Now, I'd suggest a normal conversation would be at about 80 decibels. So as far as we're concerned, the purpose of music is more of an ancillary, it's more ancillary to what is the main event, and that being a meal on boat. There's also the issue around, we also need to take into account is 75 decibels at source. We've also got the issue of distance between source and receptor, as in the premises, which will provide a distance attenuation, and also any barriers which present along the transmission path between the source, as in the boat, and the receptor, the property. So that, again, will attenuate noise even further. So that 75 dB suggestion would be reasonable and should have the effect of not causing significant disturbance to local residents. There is discussion with regards to when the boat's within 200 metres of properties on Albany Road, and that's taken into account. The only suggestion I would have within the noise management plan is that there's discussion with regards to low frequency noise, and this is particularly prominent when you've got bass in the background. Now, I know that's not the intention here, that ultimately looking further down the line is something to consider. Bass will travel that bit further than noise of a higher frequency, and what you'd get, the distance would have less of an effect on the bass, so that needs to be taken into account. There's also a discussion with regards to what we call temperature inverse, and that can happen at night on occasion, and it's whereby the different levels of temperature within the atmosphere and the sound rays will try to find a cold air, and what that effectively does is reroute sound rays back down. So you have the effect of carrying noise over larger different distances. But again, looking at the position of the objector, I don't see that being an issue in their particular case. With regards to ingress and egress, part 3.3 of the noise management plan, which is on page 5, makes mention of this. And there's also mention on page 37 of the pack with regards to safe onward journey of customers, which we had discussed at the pre-app stage also, which is positive to see it back in the report. And I also like to pick out the onshore noise monitoring. So part 3.2 of the management plan, which is on page 5, discusses proactive monitoring prior to complaints being received, which is positive, and it's well received within the plan. And also part 3.5, which discusses the response from the premises with regards to complaints and the reactive process. And I understand the intention will be to have someone at site or as close to the receptor within 15 minutes, which again, as far as I'm concerned, suitably addresses any concerns with regards to the safeguarding of the public nuisance objective. That's all from me. Any questions, please feel free.
Just one from myself. You mentioned a couple of points there, for instance, the base travel, etc. How close are we to a finalised noise management plan?
Apologies, I missed that. Do you mind
How close are we to a finalised noise management plan?
So, having had sight of the noise management plan, I think we're about 90% there, to be fair. I know there's reference to a curfew within, and I understand that that will be taken out, bearing in mind the intention is to have regulated entertainment until midnight. And then it will be a case of me, after today, making some comment with regards to those considerations I've just had and those being inserted, but I can't see that being an issue.
Appreciate it doesn't, you know, appreciate it's not really my concern. Appreciate doesn't necessarily answer your question. Could I also just flag this?
The noise management plan has to be approved by the officer. Effectively, you can't trade until it is. The boat is still under construction, so there's no risk of that, unfortunately, today. But the work that we've got to do in order to get it into a form that the officer's happy to sign off on is effectively a veto, and until that's done, we've got no trade.
Okay. Obviously, the other side are not here today, so we can't hear from them directly. Although I direct the committee to the note, which I think is the last page in the pack that we have, and obviously pointing out what has been mentioned a couple of times. What are the key points from that, which is about the noise levels, the rest of it not being directly relevant to what we can comment or consider today. Do either of you have any more questions for anybody else in the room? No. Okay. Would anyone like to sum up? Is there anyone?
In 24 years, this is a first, but no thank you.
Thank you. So again, just to reiterate, from a safeguarding the licence objectives, I believe that the noise management plan, in addition to the proposed conditions, will ensure public nuisance objectives is well maintained.
Thank you. To the licensing officer.
So just to summarise from my perspective, so the applicant has highlighted that it's not to be a nightclub but predominantly a restaurant, and they believe they are proposing to be an asset to the cultural diversity of what the island offers, which is in line with our policy, and that they have proposed a number of conditions that would be attached to the licence if it's granted that would address any concerns regarding the licensing objectives, one of which is the noise management plan, which is, as Mr. Phipps pointed out, it would have to be agreed before licensing activities are permitted if the licence is granted. Environmental Health, have confirmed that they have seen the noise management plan and it's nearly complete. That this would include a review of the source levels of noise, the control measures that will be in place. It would also usually include how complaints will be dealt with and investigated and resolved. And the objector is not here today, but their concerns remain outstanding that they still believe, despite this condition being in place, that noise nuisance might occur. Obviously, we don't know whether that will be the case, and that is why I recommend that the licence is granted with the inclusion of the noise management plan condition, which can be modified and reviewed if issues occur, as well as a review of the licence, which could be sought under the Licensing Act if necessary.
Thank you very much. Do you want to retire?
Yeah.
The licensing committee will adjourn for a few minutes while we talk to our legal officer, and then we will come back and see you all in about 5-10 minutes time, if that's okay. Right, thank you very much for your patience, everybody. I think everyone's back in now. I'd like to restart the meeting and hand over to our legal advisor, Jodie Gibson.
Thank you. Upon receiving the report of the licensing section and oral and written evidence from the applicant, responsible authorities and other persons, and having regard to the guidance issued under section 182 of the Licensing Act 2003 and the Isle of Wight Council's Statement of Licensing Policy 2014 to 2019, the subcommittee hereby grant the licence in accordance with the application, subject only to those conditions proposed by the applicant set out in the report dated the 29th of September 2021, and also subject to the mandatory conditions specified in the Licensing Act 2003. And the reason, as per the reasons given within the same report, in order to promote the licensing objectives and in accordance with the Isle of Wight Council's Statement of Licensing Policy and the Section 182 guidance, in reaching the above decision, the subcommittee have had regard to the Human Rights Act 1998 and in particular Article 1 of the First Protocol, Article 8 and Article 6. The subcommittee consider this decision is proportionate and appropriate for the promotion of the 4 licensing objectives under the Licensing Act 2003. There is a right of appeal to the Magistrates' Court if anyone is dissatisfied with this decision, and any appeal must be made within 21 days of the date of the notification. Thank you.
I will now sign this. Here we go. I need to go back that way somewhere. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll back to the meeting over, and thank you much to all the officers.